you guys.
You know, a lot more thirstier out here than you would think.
Yeah, always.
What are you guys hiking? Are you going on the end of the room trail?
Well, we were originally going to do Fairyland, but it's getting a little late, so we might do the Big Crane.
Oh, okay. You guys know all of those are back. Exactly. The only day hike you do up here would be the mountain. So, pretty much all those other trails just started.
All right, cool. Thank you. That helps.
All right.
Thanks,
All right.
guys. See ya.
Cheers. See ya. So, how many people are here for the 12:30 Grand Staircase Geology talk?
Yeah. Good morning.
Well, to those of you returning, welcome back. To those of you here for the first time, welcome to Bryce Canyon National Park. And welcome here to Rainbow Point, the highest point in Bryce Canyon National Park. We are standing right now on one of the highest plateaus in North America. How many of you know what a plateau is? We're aware of that. Yes?
Just raising my hand.
Yeah. It's a generally flat, elevated area with steep sides. It is wider than it is tall on the sides. And here you are standing in a region defined by high plateaus. It's called the High Plateau region of southwestern Utah. If you were to look at a relief map from above, you'd see what look like 3 fingers extending from the middle of the state down to its southwest corner. And these 3 fingers you can see 2 of right now. The easternmost of the 3 is the horizon line. This plateau up there is called the Aquarius Plateau, and it is the highest plateau in North America. Its highest elevations are just over 11,000 feet at a place called Boulder Mountain, which you drive over a flank of on Highway 12. As you move to the west, you arrive at the middle of the 3 fingers, and this is the plateau that you're standing on now. It's called the Paunsaugunt Plateau. It's a southern Paiute word that means home of the beaver. And its highest elevations are just over 9,000 feet, and that's where you are standing now. So the highest elevations of this plateau are at its southern end. Like the Aquarius Plateau, it tilts gently down as you travel north. So as you came from the north and traveled south, you moved up about 1,000 feet, from about 8,000 near the visitor center to just over 9,000 here. This plateau also gently tips down to the west, creating a watershed along its margin between the Colorado River watershed to the east and Nevada to the west. The western of the 3 fingers is the plateau known as the Markagunt Plateau. The Markagunt Plateau has Zion National Park carved into its southern tip, and it has Cedar Breaks National Monument at about 10,000 feet on its western side. Now, the High Plateaus region of southwest Utah is but a subregion of a larger area that is referred to as the Colorado Plateau. How many of you have heard of the Colorado Plateau on your vacation? Yes, if you've gone to other parks in this area, more than likely you've been visiting parks on the Colorado Plateau. It is an area of incredible geologic diversity and beauty, making it home to the most national parks, monuments, recreation areas, national forests by density of anywhere in the country. It's roughly centered on the Four Corners area of the American Southwest, about 130,000 square mile block. It's an arid region, so it's a desert that is dissected, cut through by a major river moving through it. Which river would that be?
Colorado.
The Colorado River, of course. Now, these 2 ingredients, an arid area with a major river moving through it, does describe the Colorado Plateau to a point, but it also describes other places on the planet that are very different from the Colorado Plateau. Take, for instance, Iraq. You've got an arid region with major rivers moving through it. You don't get the same geologic variety that you do in the American Southwest as you do in Iraq, though. Would anyone like to guess why that is? There's one part of the story of the Colorado Plateau that a place like Iraq doesn't have. Not necessarily. I mean, in a place like Iraq, you've got a record of geologic time beneath those sands, and certainly limestone's deposited at different points in time beneath it.
Freezing temperatures.
Freezing temperatures? Yeah, you're getting closer to what I'm driving at. There are freezing temperatures in the Colorado Plateau due to this unique chapter in this place's history. Plate tectonics are the driver of this change. And this change is an incredible change in elevation over the last 70 million years. This is a relatively intact sort of piece of continental crust that has been buoyed from sea level to these present day elevations of 9,000 feet, 11,000 feet throughout this region, slowly over the last 70 million years as one large piece, brought up to these high elevations and then dissected down by the Colorado River and its tributaries, creating a region where, depending on the elevation and the type of rock exposed at that elevation, and thereby the kinds of erosion working on that rock, you get all different kinds of national parks and scenic beauty to explore in this area. Now, there's another sub-region of the Colorado Plateau that is just as special as these high plateaus, and it's found to the south of this park. As you travel from Bryce Canyon 100 miles to the south, you slowly step down in elevation as you approach an area with the oldest rocks on the Colorado Plateau. Where do you think you would go to find some of the oldest rocks on the Colorado Plateau? Grand Canyon and the bottom of Grand Canyon, because most of the rocks on the plateau are sedimentary. That means they were laid down in lower lying areas, whether little wind-blown bits or in wet environments, and layered down so that the oldest layers are going to be the ones at the bottom, laid down over time. So at the bottom of Grand Canyon, you're going to find rocks close to 2 billion years old. Now, as you move up from the bottom of Grand Canyon to its rim, you're going to see a massive sweep of the Earth's geologic record for this area. But what you'll actually find is that there are more pages, chapters, chunks missing in that geologic story than is present. This is due to huge gaps in the rock record of the Grand Canyon. And those gaps are due to periods of erosion, rocks wearing away in between periods of new rocks being laid down. However, once you reach the north rim of Grand Canyon and start heading north these 100 miles to Bryce, you enter a region that contains the last 230 million years of the Earth's geologic record for this area intact. The pages are all there, telling a story of this area of the globe through two mass extinctions, the Permian with the trilobites and the Cretaceous Tertiary that killed the dinosaurs. You have got essentially one cosmic year, the amount of time it takes the Earth to travel around the Milky Way galaxy once, collecting all of these elements all along its path, elements now exposed within our bodies and on natural display before you. You have the record of the breakup of Pangaea, the last supercontinent, as its pieces drifted across the face of the planet to their present-day positions, moving through different latitudes and changing their climates as they moved, undergoing massive geologic changes as they plowed into island chains and oceanic plates, creating the modern-day globe. And you have essentially setting the stage of the modern planet and geologic landscape that we look out on today. The cliffs of what we call the Grand Staircase, this area that contains these 230 million years, are named for color. There's 5 cliffs, essentially more erosion-resistant rocks within this sequence that have distinct color and are thereby named for them, long before we had geologic formation names for these layers. They were named by Clarence Dutton, a geologist here in the 1870s. He named the lowest of them, the oldest of them, 230 million year old mudstones deposited in shallow river channels draining from the Appalachian Mountains, which are seriously old mountains, about 480 million years old, which were formed by the formation of Pangaea and drained across the continent into these braided river channels, forming mudstones with rippleized fossils and reptiles, amphibians. Dinosaurs were just starting to split off from them at this period of time. And he named them the Chocolate Cliffs because of their crumbly, chocolatey looking appearance. If you wanted to see these rocks, you'd need to go down south of Kanab, go down near Pipe Spring National Monument. They're down there right at the bottom of the Grand Staircase. Essentially, Highway 89 is the trip we're taking here from south to north. As you move up from them, from these 230 million year old mudstones and clays, you come to the next step. It's about 200 million years old, and it's known as the Vermilion Cliffs. How many of you know what color vermilion is? Don't be shy. I thought it was a different color when I first heard it. Yeah, exactly. Very good. Yeah, it's a reddish color. The Vermilion Cliffs show a transition out of these muddy, braided river channels into an area that began to dry up as the continent began to shift into warmer latitudes. And as this area began to dry up, you get a drier sand being blown by wind throughout these river channels. And it's often rich in iron, which is going to oxidize and give you this deep red color. These are taller cliffs, much straighter than what you would see in the chocolate cliffs. As you move up from the Vermilion Cliffs, you come to the next step, moving ahead, again, about another 20 million years, to the cliffs known as the White Cliffs. This is the thickest layer of rock in the Grand Staircase, and these were deposited by one of the largest wind-blown sand dune fields ever to exist on the planet, the largest to ever exist in North America. How many of you went to Zion National Park before you came here? Okay. As you went throughout the rocks of Zion National Park, did you see what's called the cross-bedding in that rock, these varying angles like this? What you're seeing is essentially millions of years of sand dunes blown in varying directions. These angles showing a shifting in the way the wind was blowing sand up the angle of the dune there. Depending on the degree, you're looking at either the wind-blown side or the leeward side there. They've now been compressed quite a bit, but there's still 2,000-foot thick cliffs there, showing just an immense time of these sand dunes being present on the continent. They exist about the time that the first flowering plants start to exist on the planet, about 140 million years ago. Now, as you come up from the White Cliffs, you reach really the first step of the Grand Staircase that you can see right in front of you. For those of you standing over here, the White Cliffs are actually exposed to the side right here, and you can see the side of their faces. Those of you who came from Zion were literally in them. Their color isn't so much white as changed by oxidizing iron and magnesium and desert varnish, giving them a variety of colors there, but they're pretty white out there. The next step above it is this step below the rocks of Bryce Canyon, and it's known as the Gray Cliffs. These are laid down about 100 million years ago, about 90 million years ago, when the environment changed very dramatically from wind-blown sand dunes throughout this area. Why this happens is that the North American continent is drifting ever to the northwest. And as it does, it's plowing into island chains and oceanic rock and building mountains along the western edge of the continent. These mountains grow high just to the west of us. And remember, throughout this entire story that I've told you so far, right here, we're at sea level. We're rivers draining into the ocean. We're low, wind-blown sand dunes. And we have high mountains towering above us. Their sediment erodes to the east and begins to weigh down this basin that we exist within on the opposite side of the ocean. And the weight begins to increase and weigh this area down. This is the Cretaceous Period that we're in right now, which means that there's no ice on the planet. The ice caps don't exist and sea levels are higher. And so by weighing down this area of the continent just a bit, you start to get ocean encroaching from the north and south until they meet and cut the North American continent in half, creating a shallow inland sea that would have been full of marine dinosaur life. Creatures like mosasaurs, whose skull you can see in the visitor center next to the relief map. 60-foot-long marine dinosaurs swimming through these warm, shallow, subtropical seas, eating each other, fighting with plesiosaurs with their long necks, eating ammonoids, the spiral-shelled ancestors of the modern-day nautiluses that exist in our oceans today. You can walk these gray badlands out there of the Gray Cliffs and find shark teeth at your feet and the fossils of all of these creatures proliferating throughout. It is due to the rich organic material within this subtropical sea that it has the grayish color that you see today. Also, during the period that this ocean exists, we start to subduct an oceanic plate. Now, normally, as oceanic plates hit the margin of a continent, they plunge at about 60 degrees, and they form volcanic chains along the edge of the continent. Well, due to the rate at which the continents were drifting in the Cretaceous, continents were moving faster than our fingernails grow this time. So they were racing across the face of the planet. And the lightness of this oceanic plate, rather than subducting and falling and plunging down, this plate that we call the Farallon plate slid underneath the continent at a very shallow angle. This had the effect of crumpling up much of the land to the west of where we are today, setting the stage for modern-day Nevada to be created. But by the time that that plate reached the modern-day Four Corners area, it had sunk just enough to begin to melt and create an uplifting heat pressure of that melting plate that began to buoy this entire Four Corners area and begin it on its slow trip up from sea level to these present-day elevations here of 9,000 feet. It began to lift it and did throughout the entire time very gently. As you travel the Colorado Plateau and look at many of these rock layers, you see that many of them have maintained their horizontal appearance. They're not severely deformed and warped into new shapes. That said, some deformities do start to appear in the landscape, and they're rather unique to the Colorado Plateau. One of these deformities is something we call a Monic Line. It's a bulge. Essentially, all these sedimentary layer cake layers that are getting deposited get pushed up from below by liquid magma, and it humps them up, but doesn't break through as a volcano. It humps this area up, deep faults are activated and create this warping. Now, one of these humps exists in the area of modern-day Capitol Reef National Park. When you go to Capitol Reef National Park, have any of you gone there on this trip? Very good. It's one of my favorites. It's eroded over time, this hump. And what you find there is just the margin of the bubble, what the Mormons call the reef, 100 miles long, an impediment to travel. But the edge of this bubble created at that time. So, interestingly enough, rather than driving 100 miles south from here to the Grand Canyon and stepping down the steps of the Grand Staircase over that time, you can drive about 45 minutes west to east through Capitol Reef National Park on Highway 24 and travel through that same period of time, except all those layers are now tilted up like pages in a book that you're driving right through the middle of. Now, the only page of the Grand Staircase you won't find at Capitol Reef National Park is its topmost step, that last chapter, what Clarence Dutton named the Pink Cliffs of Bryce Canyon National Park and Cedar Breaks National Monument, the rocks that we are standing on now. The reason you don't find them there is, of course, Capitol Reef at that time was humping up in a bulge, and these sedimentary rocks deposited throughout this area deposit in lower areas. So sediment is eroding away from that area, depositing in nearby lower areas. And one of those lower areas is right where you are now. It was a basin at this time, about 50 to 30 million years ago. So we've actually jumped over a mass extinction going from the gray to the pink cliffs. The dinosaurs, of course, about 65 million years ago. So roughly you can think of the gray to pink as dinosaur, no dinosaurs. So the rocks of Bryce Canyon are kind of the beginning of the age of mammals on the planet. And they're going to be deposited in this lower area in a series of freshwater lake systems, very shallow and very calcium-rich waters in these lake chains. These lakes exist from 50 to 30 million years ago. That's 20 million years of having shallow lake systems in one place. How many of you are familiar with the Great Lakes? Anyone know how old those are?
Last basin is about 10,000.
Yeah, exactly. They're only about 10 to 11,000 years old. Having a lake system in one place for 20 million years is going to lay down an immense amount of sediment on the bottom of that lake. And that's what you see in the Pink Cliffs of Bryce Canyon National Park. You also see how over 20 million years the environment can change dramatically in that area. Water evaporates, laying down a drier sandstone. Becomes a little deeper, depositing a very soft mudstone. As you look at hoodoos and see pinched in areas, you're seeing a softer mudstone that erodes faster than harder rocks. It's going to deposit fine-grained siltstones and then a whole lot of limestone, which is what you see predominantly in the cliffs of Bryce Canyon National Park. Limestone forms from calcium and carbon together. And there was a lot of both of these things in these shallow freshwater lakes. Calcium from the sediments eroding into the lake, carbon being provided in part by algal mats that would have been over this shallow lake system. Certainly is probably a lot more beautiful today than it would have been at the time that these sediments were being deposited. Believed to be due to the hardness of that water being inhospitable to life. The water's still very hard here. If you were to find my cabin up near the entrance to the park, kick in the door and go into the kitchen, you'd find my electric kettle there, covered in white scales. Essentially a limestone precipitating out of this very hard water as I use the electric kettle. If you were to turn on my shower and I couldn't get back to it for the better part of 1,000,000 years, I would come home to a nice big block of white Bryce limestone in my bathroom. And that's where you get these white bands throughout the pink cliffs. A limestone that not mixed in with muds and silts and clays and sands that were transporting iron that would oxidize and give you these rusty colors, but instead a deeper lake that formed a more pure limestone without iron in it and giving you these nice white colors throughout. It also lays down a very important kind of rock called dolomitic limestone. You'll see it on tops of lots of hoodoos, a grayish rock that forms when you not only have calcium and carbon but magnesium. And this forms an erosion-resistant cap rock, without which we wouldn't have hoodoos at all. So all throughout this period, this area is still continuing to slowly rise and begins to rise even faster as the lakes of Bryce Canyon, what will become Bryce Canyon, drain away. They're believed to drain away due to massive tectonic activity that begins to occur in this area. As you look to the north out here, you could almost name it as an extra step on the grand staircase. These black cliffs, the southern end of the Sevier Plateau, these are volcanic mountains out there. The southern end of the Marysvale volcanic field, which is one of the largest in North America. This begins to erupt around 25 million years ago as plate tectonic movements related to the formation of Nevada and the mountains of the Sierra Nevada start to tug this area to the west. Essentially what happens is that Farallon plate that we are subducting gets consumed, and we come up against the Pacific plate, which is where we are today. The Pacific plate's not moving this way, it's moving this way, and creates this shearing action at the continent's edge. And this shearing action begins to actually re-extend all of the crumpled rock in the area of Nevada between us and the west coast and extend it out. It's still happening today. It makes Nevada a very tectonically active area. Lots of earthquakes out there. These earthquakes form Death Valley National Park, they form the Grand Tetons, they form the Sierra Nevada, they form the Wasatch Mountains near Salt Lake. And here at Bryce Canyon we have one of the easternmost faults associated with this stretching action. Runs along the whole eastern edge of the park. You can see a feature like sinking ship from Sunset Point or any of those viewpoints, tilted up rock at the edge of the amphitheater, evidence of the fault line. But from here, the best visual example is the Aquarius Plateau. If you're able to see it through the slight haze, you'll see that plateau, the highest in North America, has the same rocks as Bryce Canyon National Park. However, the rocks on that plateau are roughly 1,000 feet higher than here, 2,000 feet higher than the main Bryce Amphitheater. They used to be at the exact same level, but as this fault occurred and we got tugged out to the west with the rest of Nevada and California, it broke us down in a way 2,000 feet. And so that's that fault line bringing us down. It brings us down to really the perfect elevation for hoodoos to form. At 8,000 feet, our temperatures here are such that about half the days of the year, temperatures fall below freezing. So how many of you live in a place where temperatures fall below freezing at night, but maybe the next day get just warm enough to start to melt snow? Yeah? Do you drive a car there? Do you see the effect of that environment on the roadways? What does it do to them?
Destroy
Yeah.
cracks and potholes.
Yeah, it forms things called potholes. It's really the exact same process occurring here at Bryce Canyon National Park. You could call this Bryce's pothole, and it would be just as accurate as anything else. Essentially, water from snow and rain trickles in to the rocks exposed here as the edge of the plateau erodes back. When it freezes, of course, it doesn't shrink. It freakishly expands. And when it expands within a rock, it breaks it apart bit by bit, creating first windows below that harder erosion-resistant layer, and then finally when it falls away, leaving behind the iconic features we call hoodoos. Of course, down at 8,000 feet in the Bryce Amphitheater, you see the constant chiseling of ice giving you hoodoos at every stage of their life, from just by the plateau, the youngest hoodoos, all the way out to the edge, those badlands, the dead hoodoos that have eroded down where the rim used to be. Up here at 9,000 feet, you see a distinctly different erosional pattern. You don't see that same sweep of hoodoos coming out from the rim. because you come up 1,000 feet, and that's enough to change that balance of freezing and thawing temperatures, so that you're getting slightly more sheer cliffs as the rocks erode more dramatically in larger pieces. Go up to 10,000 feet on the Aquarius Plateau, and you see it even different still. Of course, this is something to consider in reverse when we talk about climate change and rising temperatures on the planet. These perfect zones for plants and animals and specific erosional processes is moving up. And so as that perfect balance of freeze-thaw moves up from 8,000 feet, it will slowly leave hoodoos behind, giving us hoodoos not carved by ice, but perhaps more by rain, giving them a distinctly different shape, to be sure. So there's really no better place to see the Grand Staircase, in my opinion. First from here, but maybe wandering to Yovimpa Point and on the Bristlecone Loop if you have time. You're looking, of course, from the top, down at these cliffs from above. But I hope that this talk has kind of inspired some sense of the uniqueness of this place on the planet, the rich record of the Earth's history for this particular area, and the wonders that these rocks contain. In my opinion, the best step of the Grand Staircase is the one that you're on now. The pink cliffs are fantastic. In a region as unique as the Colorado Plateau, Bryce Canyon really stands out even amongst that company. So I want to thank all of you for caring enough to spend your day here in your public lands here at Bryce Canyon National Park. I hope that this place nurtures you and leaves you changed, which I believe is kind of impossible not to be after visiting a landscape quite like this. So happy to stick around and answer any questions anyone has, but other than that, yeah, enjoy your time here at Bryce Canyon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Peter, I gotta tell you, that was like the best